October 15th, 1982. The Canon Films lot was supposed to be empty after midnight. Vincent Torino had been Charles Bronson's trusted camera operator for 3 pictures. That's exactly why no one questioned him wheeling equipment toward the parking garage. Bronson stepped out of the shadows at 12:47 a.m., caught Vinny red-handed with $80,000 worth of Panavision gear. The two men stared at each other for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. What happened next became Hollywood's most buried secret. Studio executives made phone calls. Union bosses held closed-door meetings. And for 40 years, when industry veterans talked about Charles Bronson, they always whispered about this night. The night Vinny Torino learned that some men forgive. The night Charles Bronson proved that legends aren't born from what they take, but from what they choose to give. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Vinny's hands trembled on the equipment cart handle, knuckles white against the metal. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the parking garage, Charles Bronson looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd made a career out of playing executioners. "You gonna explain this, Vinny?" Bronson's voice carried that familiar gravelly rasp, but stripped of the warmth Vinny had grown accustomed to during their 3 films together. The words caught in Vinny's throat. How do you explain to a man who's never wanted for anything that your 8-year-old daughter is dying? That the insurance company found a loophole to deny coverage for experimental treatment? That you've already mortgaged everything, sold everything, begged from everyone? Charlie, It's Mr. Bronson right now. The correction hit like a physical blow. You've been with us for what, 2 years? Death Wish 2, 10 to midnight, now this piece of shit we're wrapping. I vouched for you every time. Told them you were solid. Vinny's chest felt crushed. Bronson had vouched for him. Had personally requested him for the camera crew on all 3 pictures. In an industry where loyalty meant everything and nothing simultaneously, Bronson had been different. He remembered crew members' names, asked about their families, showed up to wrap parties instead of sending assistants. "My daughter," Vinny started. "I know about your daughter." The word stopped Vinny cold. "Leukemia, right? 8 years old, pretty little thing, looks just like her mother." The casual mention of Sarah sent ice through Vinny's veins. How could Bronson possibly know about Sarah, about Elena? They'd never discussed family beyond polite small talk. Experimental treatment in Switzerland costs what? About 70 grand? Bronson stepped closer, his presence filling the empty space between concrete pillars. Funny coincidence, that's almost exactly what this gear runs. Vinny's mind reeled. This wasn't happening randomly. Bronson hadn't stumbled onto him by accident. "You set this up," Vinny whispered. "I set it up." Bronson nodded slowly. "Question is, what happens next?" The parking garage felt like a tomb. Somewhere in the distance, traffic hummed along Melrose, but here in the bowels of the Canon lot, they might as well have been on the moon. Vinny's career, his reputation, his family's future, everything balanced on whatever came out of Bronson's mouth next. "I could call security," Bronson continued, his voice almost conversational. "Have you arrested? Canon would prosecute for sure. They're hemorrhaging money on this picture already. You'd do 5 to 10 for grand theft. Your daughter would be dead before you got out." Each word landed like a punch. Vinny had run the scenarios 100 times, but hearing them from Bronson made them real in a way his own fears couldn't. Or, Bronson said, and the single word carried the weight of salvation, "You could finish loading that equipment. Drive it to the address I'm going to give you. Ask for a man named Sal Torino, no relation, I'm guessing, despite the name. He'll give you an envelope with enough cash for Switzerland and then some." Vinny's legs nearly buckled. "What's the catch?" "There's always a catch." Bronson's smile held no warmth. "Sal's going to own you after tonight. Not forever, but for a while. You'll do some work for him. Legitimate work mostly. Camera work for his business interests. Industrial films, training videos, that sort of thing." The word "mostly" hung in the air like smoke. "What if I say no?" Vinny asked, though they both knew the answer. "Then you put that equipment back where you found it. Go home to your wife and watch your little girl die slow while the medical bills pile up like snow in January. Vinny closed his eyes. When he opened them, Bronson was holding out a slip of paper with an address written in precise block letters. "Why?" Vinny asked. "Why help me at all?" For the first time that night, something human flickered across Bronson's face. Because 15 years ago, I was desperate too. Different circumstances, same desperation. Someone gave me a choice when they could have just buried me. Maybe it was a good choice, maybe it wasn't. But my kids grew up with their father, and that's worth something. Vinny took the paper. The address was in North Hollywood, in a part of town where legitimate businesses closed early and illegitimate ones never did. "One more thing," Bronson said as Vinny gripped the cart handle again. "After tonight, we've never met. If anyone asks, if the cops come sniffing around, if reporters get curious, we've never shared so much as a cup of coffee. Are we clear?" "Crystal. Good luck, Vinny. Take care of that little girl." Bronson disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Vinny alone with $80,000 in stolen equipment and a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He began pushing the cart toward his van, not knowing he was wheeling himself into 40 years of hell. Want to know what happened when Vinny reached that North Hollywood address? Drop a comment telling us what you think Sal Torino's real business was, and don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's chapter reveals the deal that changed everything. The address led to a warehouse that looked like every other warehouse in North Hollywood. Corrugated metal siding, loading docks dark as missing teeth, sodium lights casting everything in sick yellow. But at 2:47 a.m., with $80,000 in stolen equipment rattling in his van, Vinny noticed details he'd normally miss. The way the security cameras tracked his approach, how the 4 lease signs were too new, too clean, the fresh tire marks leading to a bay door that should have been sealed. Sal Torino had been waiting for him. Now, 40 years later, Vinny Torino sat in the same North Hollywood neighborhood, though the warehouses had given way to yoga studios and artisanal coffee shops. His hands, liver-spotted, scarred from decades of handling equipment, wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug that read "World's Okayest Camera Op." Sarah had given it to him for his 55th birthday, 3 years ago, back when she still thought her father was just unlucky, not cursed. The coffee shop's Wi-Fi was spotty, but good enough for him to review the email that had arrived that morning. Another documentary project, this one about Charles Bronson's lost final film. The sender, Maya Chen, some film school graduate probably, wanted to interview crew members from Bronson's last pictures. She'd tracked him down through the union registry, back when he was still Vincent Torino instead of the Vinny who'd spent 15 years working under his real name before the scandal broke, and he'd started calling himself Jimmy Torres, then Mickey Fontaine, then whatever name would get him through one more production. Vinny scrolled through Maya's email again. Professional, polite, offering actual money for his time, which was rare enough to make him suspicious. Most documentarians expected old crew guys to work for the privilege of telling their war stories. But Maya Chen was offering $1,500 for a day's interview, plus travel expenses. The money wasn't what caught his attention, though. It was the way she wrote about Bronson, like she knew something. Like this wasn't just another puff piece about a dead action star. "I'm particularly interested in the events surrounding the theft of camera equipment during Mr. Bronson's final production," she'd written. "I believe there's a human story there that's never been properly told." Vinny's coffee turned to acid in his mouth. Nobody knew about the theft. Canon Pictures had buried it so deep that even the insurance company never found out. The equipment had been quietly returned, the paperwork adjusted, the whole incident erased like it never happened. Bronson had kept his word. They'd never officially met, but someone had talked. The coffee shop's bell chimed, and Vinny looked up to see his daughter pushing through the door. At 32, Sarah moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned early that life was fragile. The cancer had been beaten, but it left marks, not just the scar along her hairline where they'd inserted the shunt, but in the way she checked her phone obsessively, making sure her own daughter was accounted for. Trauma had a generational echo. Dad. Sarah slid into the chair across from him, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a 12-hour shift. "You look like hell, charming as always." Vinny closed his laptop. "How's my granddaughter?" "Emma's fine. Still asking when Grandpa's going to teach her about cameras. Sarah's smile carried an edge. I keep telling her you're retired, semi-retired. Right, semi-retired from making movies no one watches with people no one's heard of. She leaned forward. Dad, when's the last time you worked on anything that actually made it to theaters? The honest answer was 1997. Some straight-to-video action thing starring a former soap opera actor and a budget that wouldn't cover craft services on a real movie. Everything since had been corporate videos, wedding films, the occasional commercial for a personal injury lawyer. Work that paid enough to keep him fed but not enough to feel like living. I might have something new, he said, surprising himself. Sarah's expression shifted, hope and worry in equal measure. Something good? Documentary, about Charles Bronson. The name hit Sarah like a physical force. She went very still, the way she always did when anything touched on that period of their lives. She'd been too young to understand the details, but she remembered the fear, the way her parents would stop talking when she entered a room, how they'd moved houses twice in 3 months, her father explaining they needed to be closer to work. Dad. Her voice carried a warning. You swore you'd never talk about that stuff. It's been 40 years. Doesn't matter. Some things stay buried for a reason. Vinny studied his daughter's face, seeing Elena in the set of her jaw, the way her eyes narrowed when she was scared but trying not to show it. Elena had made him promise, on her deathbed, that he'd leave the past alone, that he'd protect Sarah from the choices he'd made. But $1,500 was rent money, and Sarah's own daughter deserved better than watching her grandfather fade into nothing. One interview, he said. That's all. Sarah reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Her skin was warm, alive, unmarked by the poison that should have killed her decades ago. Some debts can't be paid off, Dad. They just compound interest. His phone buzzed against the cafe table. The screen showed a number he didn't recognize, but the area code made his stomach clench. 323, Heart of Old Hollywood. Sarah's grip tightened on his hand as she saw his face change. Don't answer it, she whispered. But his thumb was already swiping across the screen. Vincent Torino? The voice was crisp, professional, with the faintest trace of an accent he couldn't place. Female, young, confident in the way that only came from having nothing to lose. Depends who's asking. Maya Chen. I sent you an email this morning about the Bronson documentary. I was hoping we could meet. Vinny's free hand found the edge of the table, gripping it like an anchor. Across from him, Sarah had gone pale, her nurse's instincts recognizing crisis even without context. I haven't decided if I'm interested, Vinny said carefully. I think you will be. Especially once you hear what I know about the night of March 15, 1982. The date hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. March 15th, the last night of principal photography on Death Hunt 3. The night he'd stolen the equipment. The night that had started everything. I don't know what you're talking about. Maya's laugh was soft, almost musical. Mr. Torino, I know about the Panavision cameras. I know about Sal Torino, no relation, right? I know about the warehouse in North Hollywood and what you had to do afterward to keep your family safe. The coffee shop around him seemed to dim, the conversations of other patrons fading to white noise. Sarah was leaning forward now, her medical training kicking in as she recognized the signs of shock in her father's face. Who are you? Vinny's voice came out as a croak. I'm someone who's been looking for you for a very long time. My real name isn't Maya Chen, Mr. Torino. It's Maya Castellano. Castellano. The name dropped into his memory like a stone into still water, sending ripples through 40 years of buried history. Tony Castellano. The man who died because Vinny couldn't keep his mouth shut. The man whose blood had bought Vinny's silence for 4 decades. That's impossible, he whispered. Tony never had kids. He had a daughter. Me. I was 6 years old when you got him killed. The phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Around him, the coffee shop continued its normal rhythm. Espresso machine hissing, registers chiming, conversations flowing. But Vinny felt like he was drowning in plain sight. Dad? Sarah's voice seemed to come from very far away. Dad, what's wrong? Maya's voice continued, relentless. I've spent 20 years piecing together what really happened. The documentary is real, Mr. Torino, but it's not about Charles Bronson. It's about you. It's about what you stole and who died because of it. It's about a little girl who grew up without a father because a desperate man made a deal with the devil. Your father was... Vinny started, then caught himself. Not here. Not with Sarah listening, her face growing more frightened by the second. My father was what? A criminal? A bad man? Maybe, but he was also the only family I had, and you took him away from me. Maya's voice remained steady, controlled. I'm staying at the Chateau Marmont, room 412. I'll give you 24 hours to decide if you want to tell your story your way, or if you'd prefer I tell it mine. You can't prove anything. Can I? I have my father's notebooks, Mr. Torino. Very detailed notebooks. I have recordings he made as insurance, back when he thought Sal might decide he was a liability. I have photographs, financial records, even some of the equipment serial numbers. She paused, letting that sink in. But most importantly, I have you. Because you're going to help me finish what my father started. The line went dead. Vinny stared at the phone in his hand, his reflection distorted in the black screen. 40 years of running, hiding, surviving, and it came down to this, a voice from the grave, calling in a debt he'd never known he owed. Dad. Sarah's voice was sharp now, commanding in the way that meant she was scared but trying to take control. Who was that? Vinny looked up at his daughter, seeing Elena in her worried expression, seeing his granddaughter in the stubborn set of her jaw. 3 generations of Torino women, all paying the price for choices he'd made before Sarah was old enough to understand consequence. He thought about Elena's deathbed promise, about keeping the past buried. But the past had just dug itself up and knocked on his door. That was trouble, he said finally. The kind that doesn't go away on its own. Sarah's phone was already out, her fingers flying over the screen. I'm calling in sick tomorrow. We need to figure this out. But Vinny knew there was no figuring it out. There was only facing it. The bill for his daughter's life had finally come due. No. Vinny's voice cracked like old leather. You're not calling in sick. You're not getting involved in this. Sarah looked up from her phone, her fingers frozen mid-text. Dad, I'm not leaving you alone with whatever this is. Yes, you are. Vinny stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the coffee shop's polished concrete floor. The sound drew glances from nearby tables. A young screenwriter hunched over his laptop, 2 women comparing headshots, the usual collection of Hollywood dreamers and survivors. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by 40-year-old debts. I need air, he muttered, pushing toward the exit. The afternoon heat hit him like a slap. North Hollywood in October still carried summer's weight, the smog-heavy air thick enough to taste. Vinny fumbled for his cigarettes, a habit he'd supposedly quit when Emma was born, though Sarah didn't need to know about his occasional relapses. His hands shook as he lit the Marlboro. Maya Castellano, Tony's daughter. The math worked. She'd be 26 now, about the right age for a film school graduate with enough confidence to track down ghosts. But Tony had never mentioned a kid, never mentioned anyone. That should have been Vinny's first clue that he'd never really known Tony Castellano at all. The coffee shop door chimed behind him. Sarah emerged, her scrubs bright against the faded storefront, her expression set in the same stubborn lines that had gotten her through chemotherapy at 8 years old. You can't shut me out, she said. Not when it involves our family. It doesn't involve our family. It involves me. Bullshit. Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice. I remember, Dad. Maybe not details, but I remember being scared. I remember Mom crying when she thought I couldn't hear. I remember you looking over your shoulder everywhere we went for months. Vinny took a deep drag, buying time. The nicotine hit his system like a familiar poison. You were a kid. Kids imagine things. Kids know when their parents are terrified. A metro bus wheezed past, belching diesel exhaust. Vinny watched it disappear around the corner, carrying its load of dishwashers and night shift workers toward lives that made sense. Linear lives. Lives where the past stayed buried. I need to make some calls, he said finally. To who? That was the problem. Who could he call? Most of the crew from those Bronson pictures was dead. Heart attacks, cancer, overdoses, the usual casualties of an industry that burned through people like fuel. The ones still alive had their own secrets to protect. But there was one name that kept surfacing in his memory: Mickey Torino, Sal's nephew, the kid who'd sometimes hung around the warehouse in the early days. Mickey had gotten out clean somehow, opened a camera rental house in Burbank, built a legitimate business. They'd crossed paths occasionally over the years, professional nods at equipment conventions, careful small talk that never touched on shared history. If anyone would know whether Maya Castellano was legitimate, it would be Mickey. Dad? Sarah's voice pulled him back to the present. Nobody you need to worry about. Stop protecting me. I'm 32 years old, and you're alive because I made certain choices. The words came out harder than he'd intended. You think that was luck? You think the money for your treatment just appeared? Sarah went very still. What are you talking about? Vinny's cigarette had burned down to his fingers. He dropped it, crushing it under his heel with more force than necessary. 40 years of keeping his mouth shut, and now he was on the verge of spilling everything to his daughter in a North Hollywood parking lot. Forget I said that. No. Sarah stepped in front of him, blocking his path to the van. Mom told me you worked extra jobs, commercials, industrial films. She said you barely slept for 2 years. The lie had been Elena's idea. Better for Sarah to think her father was a workaholic than a criminal. Better for her to grow up believing in honest struggle rather than dirty money. That's what happened, Vinny said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then why are you scared? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. Different number this time, but still that same 323 area code. His thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment before he answered. Vinny fucking Torino. The voice was rough, whiskey-soaked, familiar despite 4 decades of erosion. Heard you might be having a bad day, Mickey. Somehow Mickey already knew. Vinny turned away from Sarah, pressing the phone closer to his ear. How did you... Little Bird told me. Little Bird with a dead daddy and a long memory. Mickey's laugh held no humor. She's been making calls, Vinny, asking questions. Old questions about old business. What do you know about her? I know she's real. I know she's smart. And I know she's got enough proof to bury what's left of all of us. The words hit Vinny like ice water. Behind him, he could hear Sarah shifting anxiously, trying to catch fragments of the conversation. Mickey, I never... Doesn't matter what you never did. Matters what she thinks you did. The line went quiet for a moment, filled with the sound of Mickey's labored breathing. Vinny, this girl's been hunting us for 20 years, and now she's found us. The parking lot felt like it was closing in around him. Vinny gripped the phone tighter, watching Sarah's reflection in the van's dusty window as she paced behind him, her medical training warring with maternal instinct. She wanted to help, but she could smell the danger. What kind of proof? Vinny whispered into the phone. Mickey's wheeze carried across 4 decades of cigarettes and regret. The kind that puts old men in prison, Vinny. She showed me photographs yesterday. Me and you and Sal loading equipment into that warehouse. Time-stamped, professional quality. That's impossible. No one was taking pictures. Someone was. Someone who knew exactly what they were documenting. Mickey paused, and Vinny could hear ice clinking in a glass. Day drinking. That was new. Or maybe Mickey had just stopped hiding it. She's got audio, too. Conversations. Your voice, Vinny. My voice. Talking about things we swore we'd never talk about. Vinny's mouth went dry. He remembered Tony always having gadgets, little recording devices he'd fidget with during their meetings. Insurance, Tony had called it. Protection against Sal's changing moods. But Vinny had assumed all of that had died with Tony. How much does she know? Everything. The word fell like a stone into still water. About the cameras, about the warehouse, about what happened after, about why Tony really died. Sarah had stopped pacing. She was standing directly behind him now, close enough that he could feel her breathing. 32 years old, but in moments like this she became 8 again, scared, sick, dependent on parents who were drowning but couldn't let her see it. Mickey, I've got to... You've got to nothing. You've got to listen. Mickey's voice hardened. This girl, she's not some film school kid playing detective. She's been planning this for years, decades. She knows things about us that we forgot we knew about ourselves. Through the coffee shop window, Vinny could see the normal world continuing its rhythm. People ordering lattes, checking phones, living lives unburdened by history. He envied them so deeply it felt like physical pain. What does she want? Justice. Revenge. Same thing, depending on your perspective. Mickey coughed, a wet sound that suggested conversations like this one were numbered. She wants to know why her father died. She wants to know who gave the order. She wants names, Vinny, and she's starting with us because we're still breathing. Vinny closed his eyes, seeing Tony Castellano's face for the first time in years. Not the way he'd looked at the end, bloodied, terrified, begging, but earlier, laughing at some joke Sal had made, counting out bills with hands that moved like a magician's, talking about getting out of the business clean. Tony had been the smart one, the one with plans, the one who'd kept records. She's his daughter, Vinny said, more to himself than to Mickey. Yeah, and she's got his brains. Plus 20 years of anger and a film degree that taught her how to ask the right questions. Another pause, another clink of ice. Vinny, I'm 73 years old. I got grandkids in college and a heart that skips beats when I get excited. I can't run anymore. But you've still got time. Run where? Anywhere that's not here when she starts rolling cameras. Sarah's hand landed on Vinny's shoulder, gentle but insistent. When he turned around, her face held that look he remembered from her sick days. Pale but determined, fragile but absolutely unyielding. Dad, who died? The question hung in the smoggy air like a physical presence. Vinny looked at his daughter, seeing Elena's eyes, Elena's stubborn mouth, Elena's capacity for loving someone even when they didn't deserve it. Elena had taken the truth to her grave. She died believing her husband was weak but not evil. That distinction had mattered to her, and it had kept their marriage intact through 23 years of careful omissions. Dad? Someone who deserved better, Vinny said finally. Mickey's voice crackled through the phone's speaker, loud enough now for Sarah to hear fragments. Time to decide, Vinny. You can meet with her and try to control the narrative, or you can let her tell the story her way. But she's telling it either way. Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping to the tone she used with difficult patience. Who's telling what story? Vinny thought about the 8-year-old girl who'd fought cancer with more courage than he'd ever shown, the teenager who'd worked part-time jobs to help pay bills she didn't know were swollen with blood money, the woman who'd become a nurse because she believed in healing, in making broken things whole again. He thought about Emma, 5 years old and still young enough to believe her grandfather was a hero, still young enough to think the world made sense. Mickey, Vinny said into the phone, how long do we have? She wants to start filming tomorrow. Chateau Marmont, like she told you. Mickey's breathing had gotten labored. Vinny, whatever you decide, don't do it alone. This girl, she's been preparing for this moment her whole life. She's ready for us. The line went dead, leaving Vinny holding a silent phone and his daughter's increasingly frightened stare. The silence stretched between them like a loaded gun. Sarah's eyes never left his face, and Vinny could see her putting pieces together. Fragments of overheard phone calls, his reaction to Maya's name, 40 years of careful omissions suddenly forming a pattern she didn't want to recognize. Dad. Her voice carried that quiet authority she used in the ICU when someone was coding. I need you to tell me what's happening. Vinny's phone buzzed again. Text message this time. Unknown number, but he knew who it was before he even looked. I have something that belongs to you. Check your email. His hands fumbled with the phone's browser, muscle memory navigating to an email account he hadn't checked in months. The message was there, sent 3 minutes ago. No subject line, just an attachment and a single line of text. Your daughter deserved to know where the money really came from. The attachment was a photograph, black and white, grainy but clear enough. A hospital billing statement from Cedars-Sinai dated March 1983. Sarah's name at the top. Below it, a handwritten note in Elena's careful script, payment in full, cash. But it wasn't the billing statement that made Vinny's world tilt sideways. It was what was clipped behind it, a deposit slip from Security Pacific Bank. The amount matched the hospital bill exactly. And in the memo line, in handwriting he hadn't seen in 4 decades for the kid, TC, Tony Castellano, Tony had paid Sarah's medical bills. The phone slipped from Vinny's numb fingers, clattering on the asphalt. Sarah caught it before it could hit the ground, her reflexes sharp from years of catching falling patience. She glanced at the screen, and Vinny watched her face change as she processed what she was seeing. Dad. The word came out strangled. Dad. Who is TC? But Vinny was somewhere else entirely, remembering a conversation he'd buried so deep it felt like someone else's memory. Tony, counting out bills in the warehouse, making jokes about Sal's paranoia. The casual way Tony had asked about the kid, about how the treatments were going. Vinny had thought it was small talk, the kind of surface concern that meant nothing, except Tony had been taking notes, recording everything, including the fact that Vinny Torino was drowning in medical debt and desperate enough to steal camera equipment to save his daughter's life. She didn't hire me for a documentary, Vinny whispered. What? The pieces were falling into place now, and each one felt like a physical blow. Maya Castellano hadn't found him by accident. She hadn't spent 20 years tracking him down for revenge. She'd known exactly where he was all along, because her father had been watching him, recording him, building a file. Tony Castellano had paid for Sarah's cancer treatment, not out of guilt or generosity, but as an investment, insurance, a way to own Vinny Torino completely. She's not here for revenge, Vinny said, his voice growing stronger as the horrible logic crystallized. She's here to collect. Sarah was staring at the phone screen, her medical training helping her decode the billing statement's implications. This is from when I was sick. This TC person paid. She stopped, the number hitting her. Dad, this is $60,000. In 1983. Tony Castellano. He was... Vinny searched for words that wouldn't destroy everything Sarah believed about her childhood. He was someone I worked with, someone who helped when we needed it. Helped how? But Sarah's expression said she was already figuring it out. Dad, you told me the insurance covered most of it. You said you worked extra jobs for the rest. Another text message appeared on the fallen phone. Sarah read it aloud, her voice getting smaller with each word. Your father has been making payments to my offshore account for 40 years, monthly installments on the debt. But inflation is a bitch, and the principal keeps growing. Vinny felt the last of his carefully constructed world collapse around him. 40 years of believing he'd paid his debts, of thinking the monthly transfers to Mickey's dummy corporation were buying his family's safety. But Maya had been watching all along, letting him think he was free while the interest compounded. Payments? Sarah's voice cracked. What payments? Dad, what debt? The phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Sarah answered before Vinny could stop her. Sarah Torino speaking. Maya's voice carried clearly in the afternoon air, calm and professional. Hello, Sarah. My name is Maya Castellano. I think it's time you learned what your recovery really cost. Sarah, hang up, Vinny said, but his daughter was already too far gone, pulled into the undertow of a truth that had been 40 years in the making. Ms. Castellano, Sarah said, her nurse's training kicking in. I think there's been some kind of mistake. Maya's laugh was soft, almost fond. No mistake. Your father stole from the wrong people to save your life. My father paid your bills to own him, and now that debt belongs to me. The line went quiet for a moment. The documentary was never about Charles Bronson, Sarah. It was about you. His hand tightened around the phone, her knuckles white against the black plastic. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic on Lancashire Boulevard and Maya's patient breathing through the speaker. I don't understand, Sarah said finally, though her voice suggested she was beginning to understand everything. Your father never told you about the warehouse, did he? Maya's tone remained conversational, almost gentle. About the cameras he took from Charles Bronson's set? About my father's business arrangement with Sal Genovese? Vinny lunged for the phone, but Sarah stepped back, her free hand raised in warning. 32 years of watching her father flinch at unexpected phone calls, of seeing him check locks twice before bed, of noticing how he never talked about the early 80s. It was all crystallizing into a picture she'd spent her adult life trying not to see. Miss Castellano, Sarah said, whatever this is about, it happened before I could understand. You were 8, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Diagnosed February 15, 1983. Maya's words were precise, clinical. Cedars-Sinai wanted $60,000 up front for the experimental treatment protocol. Your father's insurance had been canceled when he got fired from Universal for showing up drunk to a McQueen picture. Sarah's eyes found Vinny's face, searching for denial that didn't come. He'd never told her about Universal, never mentioned McQueen or the drinking that had started after Elena's miscarriage in 1982. The year everything had gone sideways. The year desperation had made him stupid enough to think he could steal from Sal Genovese and walk away clean. So he took cameras from the Bronson set, Maya continued. Professional equipment worth maybe $15,000 if he could find a buyer. But my father found him first. Maya, Vinny said, loud enough for the phone to pick up his voice. Leave her out of this. She's been in this since birth, Vincent. The moment you decided her life was worth more than Tony Castellano's. Sarah lowered the phone slightly, staring at her father. Who was Tony Castellano? The question hung between them like a blade. Vinny thought about the warehouse on that last night, about Tony's hands shaking as he tried to explain why he'd been skimming from Sal's operations, about the sound Tony had made when Sal's people finally caught up with him, about the choice Vinny had made to walk away instead of intervening. He was a man who helped save your life, Vinny said carefully, and a man I should have helped save. Maya's voice cut through the speaker again. My father paid your daughter's medical bills, Vincent, all of them. He paid them because you were useful to him, a desperate man with access to film equipment and connections throughout the industry. He thought it was a good investment. Sarah's face had gone pale, but her grip on the phone remained steady. What kind of investment? Insurance fraud, fake commercial shoots to move money, equipment theft from major productions. Maya's recitation was matter-of-fact, almost bored. Your father became very good at it. He had to be. The debt kept growing. That's not, Vinny started, but Maya cut him off. 40 years of monthly payments, Vincent. $800 a month, transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands. Did you really think that was enough to pay off $60,000 plus interest? The math hit Vinny like a physical blow. 40 years times 12 months times $800. $384,000. More than 6 times the original debt, and apparently still not enough. Sarah was doing the same calculation, her medical background making her comfortable with numbers. Dad, you've been paying... She stopped, the full implications washing over her. This is why Mom had to work double shifts, why we never went on vacations, why you always looked so tired. Your mother never knew, Vinny said quickly. She thought it was legitimate debt. Medical bills, equipment loans. She died thinking I was weak, not criminal. But you were both. Maya's voice carried no judgment, just observation. You were weak enough to steal, and criminal enough to let my father die for it. Sarah raised the phone again, her voice steady despite the tears starting to track down her cheeks. How did your father die, Miss Castellano? The pause stretched long enough that Vinny wondered if Maya had hung up. Then her voice came back, softer now, almost vulnerable. He tried to get out. In 1987, he told Sal Genovese he wanted to retire, move to Florida, disappear. But he made the mistake of asking for his files back, all the insurance policies he'd built up over the years, all the recorded conversations and photographs. Maya, don't, Vinny whispered. Sal had him killed in the same warehouse where your father used to store stolen equipment. They made it look like a heart attack, but the coroner was on Sal's payroll. Maya's composure finally cracked slightly. I was 6 years old. I watched them carry his body out of our house. Sarah's free hand found Vinny's arm, gripping it tightly. I'm so sorry. Your father was there that night, Maya said. He could have warned mine. He could have intervened. Instead, he chose to protect his own arrangement with Sal. Her voice hardened again. He chose your life over my father's. The phone slipped from Sarah's trembling fingers, hitting the asphalt with a sharp crack. The screen went dark, but Maya's final words hung in the air like smoke. He chose your life over my father's. Vinny watched his daughter stagger backward, her face cycling through shock, grief, and something that looked like recognition. The careful distance she'd always maintained from his past suddenly made sense. Some part of her had always known not to look too closely. Sarah! Don't. Her voice cut through the afternoon heat with surgical precision. Don't you dare try to explain this away. For 40 years, Vinny had imagined this moment. In his worst nightmares, he'd seen Sarah learning the truth, watching her face change as she understood what her life had cost. But he'd never imagined her standing so straight, so absolutely steady, as everything she'd believed about her family crumbled. "You let a man die," she said. "You let him die so you could keep paying for my treatment." It wasn't that simple. It was exactly that simple. Sarah's training had taught her to see through complicated explanations to the essential truth underneath. You had a choice. You chose me. The admission hung between them, naked and irrefutable. Vinny thought about Tony Castellano's last phone call, the panic in his voice as he'd explained that Sal was asking too many questions about the missing money. Tony had begged for help, for somewhere to hide, for anything that might buy him time to disappear. And Vinny had chosen silence, chosen Sarah's chemotherapy over Tony's life, chosen to let a 6-year-old girl lose her father so his 8-year-old daughter could keep hers. "I would make the same choice again," he said quietly. Sarah's composure finally cracked. The tears came suddenly, violently. 32 years of suppressed questions pouring out at once. "Do you have any idea what that means? What it's like to find out your entire life is built on someone else's death? Sarah, you were dying. The doctors said without treatment. I know what I was." Her voice rose to just short of shouting. "I lived it. Every needle, every surgery, every day wondering if I'd see another birthday. But I never asked for this. I never asked you to become a criminal. You were 8 years old. You couldn't ask for anything." "And she was 6. Sarah pointed at the broken phone toward Maya Castellanos' disembodied voice. "She was 6 when her father died because you were too much of a coward to warn him." The words hit Vinny like physical blows. He'd spent decades justifying his choices, building elaborate moral frameworks that allowed him to sleep at night. But standing here, watching his daughter's world collapse, all those justifications turned to ash. "You're right," he said. The simple admission stopped Sarah's tears as abruptly as they'd started. She'd been prepared for explanations, excuses, the kind of careful wordplay that had characterized their relationship for 30 years. She hadn't been prepared for honesty. "What?" "You're right. I was a coward. I let Tony die because I was afraid of losing you." Vinny stepped closer, his voice gaining strength. "I was afraid of watching you waste away in some hospital bed because I couldn't afford to save you. I was afraid of explaining to your mother why our daughter had to die because her husband was too proud to steal." Sarah stared at him, seeing her father clearly for the first time. Not the careful man who'd spent decades hiding from his past, but the desperate parent who'd made an impossible choice in an impossible moment. "So you chose murder," she whispered. "I chose you. They're the same thing." The silence that followed was absolute. Around them, North Hollywood continued its rhythm, cars passing, phones ringing in distant offices, the ordinary sounds of a world that hadn't stopped because Vincent Torino's daughter finally knew what he was. "What happens now?" Sarah asked finally. Vinny thought about Maya Castellano, somewhere across the city, probably watching her phone and waiting for the explosion she'd just detonated. She'd waited 20 years for this moment, planned every word to achieve maximum damage, and she wasn't finished. "She wants more than money," he said. "She wants me to admit what I did, on camera. She wants the whole story. Then give it to her." The words came so quietly that Vinny almost missed them. When he looked up, Sarah was staring at the broken phone, her face set in lines of terrible resolution. "Sarah, give her what she wants." Sarah met his eyes, and he saw Elena's stubborn courage looking back at him. "Tell the truth, all of it. What you did, what it cost, why you did it." Her voice broke slightly. "Tell her about the 8-year-old girl who never knew her life came with a price tag. That would destroy everything. Your career, Emma's future. Emma's future was already built on blood money, Dad. At least this way, it ends with us." 3 weeks later, Vinny sat alone in the same Burbank soundstage where Maya had first interviewed him. But everything had changed. The equipment was different now. Real documentary cameras, not the hidden surveillance setup she'd used before. A full crew bustled around the space, professionals Maya had hired with the advance from Netflix after they'd bought the rights to what she was now calling blood money, a Hollywood reckoning. The irony wasn't lost on him. After 40 years of running from cameras, he was about to confess everything on film. Sarah hadn't spoken to him since that afternoon in the parking lot. She'd moved Emma out of his house the same night, taking only what they'd brought with them. The silence felt different from their previous estrangements, final in a way that made Vinny's chest ache. But she'd been right about ending it with them. The story had to finish somewhere. Maya emerged from behind the monitors, looking younger than she had during their first meeting. The weight of 20 years of planning seemed to have lifted from her shoulders, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. "You ready for this?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. "No." Vinny adjusted the lapel microphone they'd clipped to his shirt. "But I should have done it 40 years ago." Maya studied him for a moment, this man who'd shaped her entire life without knowing she existed. "My father kept journals," she said quietly. "I found them after Sal died in prison. Tony wrote about you in the last entry, about how scared you were when your daughter got sick. He actually felt sorry for you." The revelation hit Vinny harder than any accusation could have. "He knew I wouldn't help him. He knew you couldn't. There's a difference." Maya signaled to her crew. But knowing something doesn't make it hurt less. The cameras rolled, and for the next 4 hours, Vincent Torino told the truth. All of it. The drinking after Elena's miscarriage, the desperation when Sarah got sick, the cameras he'd stolen from Bronson's set, and the choice he'd made when Tony Castellano called asking for help. The 40 years of payments, the gradual realization that he'd never be free, and the price his family had paid for his cowardice. Maya asked hard questions, but not cruel ones. She let him explain without excusing, confess without seeking absolution. When he broke down describing Sarah's reaction to learning the truth, Maya handed him tissues but kept filming. This was what 20 years of planning had bought her. Not revenge, but something more valuable, understanding. "Do you regret saving her?" Maya asked, as the afternoon light began to fade through the soundstage windows. Vinny considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. "I regret how I did it. I regret what it cost your father, and you, and ultimately Sarah herself. But regret saving her?" He shook his head. "I'm not that good a man." Maya called cut as the sun disappeared behind the studio buildings. The crew began breaking down equipment with the efficient quiet of professionals who understood they'd captured something important. Maya sat in her director's chair, reviewing footage on her monitor, her face unreadable. "What happens now?" Vinny asked. "Now it gets edited and broadcast, and the whole world gets to judge whether Vincent Torino was a monster or just a father." Maya looked up from the screen. "The prosecutors are already interested. Sal's dead, but the statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder conspiracies. You'll probably do time." Vinny nodded. He'd expected as much. "And the debt?" "There is no debt." Maya's smile held no warmth, but no cruelty either. "There never was, really. My father paid Sarah's bills because he felt guilty about using you. The monthly payments you've been making? That was Sal's idea, his way of keeping you afraid and compliant. I could have stopped them any time after I turned 18. The words hung in the air like smoke. 40 years of sacrifice, of living in fear, of watching Elena work herself into an early grave, all of it unnecessary. Why didn't you? Because I was 6 years old when they carried my father's body out of our house, and I needed someone to pay for that." Maya closed the laptop, her 20-year mission finally complete. "But payment and justice aren't the same thing. It took me this long to learn the difference." As Vinny walked to his car in the empty parking lot, he thought about Sarah, probably helping Emma with homework in their new apartment across town. They might never speak to him again, but they were free now. Free from the weight of secrets, from the taint of blood money, from the carefully constructed lies that had defined their family for decades. The story would air in 6 weeks. Sarah would watch it, and Emma would finally understand why her grandfather always seemed to be listening for footsteps that never came. Maya would win awards for her unflinching examination of how desperation corrupts love, and Vincent Torino would face whatever consequences remained. But tonight, driving through the neon-lit streets of North Hollywood, Vinny felt something he hadn't experienced in 40 years. the strange, painful relief of a man who had finally stopped running